Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Ryan Richards, a residential loan officer and real estate investor based out of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Today I'm bringing another solo episode talking about 3 criteria you can use to analyze the potential of a real estate investment in just 60 seconds. Real estate investors get deals thrown at us all the time, but you have to be able to sift through the noise. So here are 3 strategies that I use to find unlocked potential. Now, there's probably a million different metrics you can use, and everyone has their own philosophy. And ultimately, the metrics or criteria you look at to vet the opportunity of a deal, especially on a back-of-napkin type basis, will really depend on what your plan is with the property. If you're a real estate flipper, your numbers are going to be totally different than what I would look at as a multifamily buy and hold investor. So that obviously becomes very relevant. But my 3 metrics that I use, number 1, is what we call the 1% rule. If you haven't heard of this metric, it's one of the golden rules in multifamily investing. It gives you a very quick look at whether or not a property can produce monthly cash flow. The 1% rule essentially states that the pro forma rents on the property should be equivalent to at least 1% of the property's value. Let's put some numbers to that. So let's say, for example, you're looking at $1 million property. Well, I know for me, if the monthly rent roll is not at least $10,000 a month, it's probably not an opportunity that I want to look at. I'm interested in properties that produce a lot of cash, give me a high return on my cash that's invested. So there needs to be a lot of income there relative to the price. If it passes at least that sniff test, then I can go deeper into the numbers. Does the landlord pay the utilities? Do they have external trash? Are they paying their own trash? Get into the nuts and bolts of the deal to see if it really makes sense. But if the monthly rent roll is not at least 1% of the price, I'm clicking on to the next property. Because a lot of times real estate investors get distracted. And if you're listening to this, you're probably one of those people. You see a deal online, it looks from the pictures like a nice property, and you start underwriting the deal. You're going through your spreadsheets, you're putting in all the data, and you ultimately find out that the price they're asking for the property isn't worth it for your metrics. Now, I know for me, I want at least 15% cash on cash return. So for me to get that objective, I would need to find a property that produces a lot more than the 1% rule. But by using that as my baseline, I can weed out a lot of the opportunities that I'd otherwise waste my time analyzing. So it's an easy one to take a look at. Now, obviously, if you're someone who's investing in a different market than I am, that number is totally different. For example, if you're a Boston-based investor, that could be a pretty difficult number to achieve. Typically the higher value, higher appreciation markets have lower rent to price ratios. So something to keep in mind, your numbers, your investment philosophy could be different. If, let's say, the property passes the initial sniff test, or let's say it's close. Let's say the property is $1 million, it generates $10,000 a month in rent. Let me dig a little bit further. The second thing I would look at is what I would say is mismatch square footage to bedroom, bathroom counts. Because ultimately, if I can find an opportunity to add another bedroom to a current unit or add another bathroom to a current unit, that increases the amount of rent I can generate for the building and ultimately increases the value of the property. So for example, if I see that the property is, let's say, 3 2-bedroom units and the property's 3,600 square feet, that tells me each unit is 1,200 square feet. Well, I know off the top of my head, if there's a 1,200 square foot 2-bedroom unit, there's a pretty good chance you can find the opportunity to put a 3rd bedroom. Now, instead of that particular building only renting for, let's say, $2,000 a month for a 2-bedroom unit, I can probably now get $2,500, $2,700 for a 3-bedroom unit. But because I used that initial sniff test, I at least knew it was close and I can dig in for that other opportunity. In a similar token, let's say the property has unused square footage. You'll see in listings all the time, there's an unfinished attic space that can potentially be expanded upon. That might be another opportunity I consider as well. Let me take that 3rd floor unit from a 2-bedroom into a 4-bedroom. What does that number look like? And I can start to analyze further, how much is it going to cost? What's my expected rent? Does it make sense? But I use that initial sniff test to get me in the door. Will the rents at least be 1% of the purchase price? If so, are there any opportunities to increase the rent roll the property can generate? In a similar fashion, I start to look at other income generating opportunities. Are there washer dryers on the property? Are they coin operated? Can I get some income coming from the coin op laundry? Is there a garage on the property? Can I rent out the space for storage? How much could I get for that storage? Is the lot excessively large? Could I look at potentially an opportunity for some storage on the property? These are some of the things I would go to next to try to figure out, are there other opportunities? If it passes that test, one other piece that I look for might not be relevant for you and your specific investment objectives, but condo conversion opportunities. So that's one thing I'll take a look at, is the price per unit relative to what the resale could be as a condo. So for example, the property I just looked at recently, it was on the market for $3 million. It was a 9-unit complex, a 6-unit and a 3-unit together. They're all 2-bedroom units. They're about 1,100 square feet. Well, if I were to buy that property as a package, meaning I buy the 6-unit and 9-unit together as multifamily buildings, my cost per unit is about $333,000. So I'm paying $333,000 per unit as a multifamily package. But opportunity, what could I sell those 2 units for as condos? Well, 2-unit condos in this particular section of Providence could probably sell for $475,000 to $500,000, meaning you can potentially make $160,000 per unit by selling them off as condos. That's one opportunity that I'm interested in. So for me, that cost per unit relative to the sale as a condo is relevant for me. Now, then of course, if that passes the sniff test, which this does, right? If you bought the building for $333,000 a unit, you sold them off for $500,000, making $160,000 a unit times 9 units. That's over $1 million. Great numbers. But then my question would be, well, what condition are the units in? And are they all tenanted? Because if they're tenanted, I have to get the tenants out to convert to condos, which means I have to borrow and pay for the money I'm borrowing for X number of months until I complete that process. And also, condos typically have a higher finish quality than a rental apartment. So do I have to go in and spend $50,000 per unit to update these? That's part of the next phase of the analysis. But I look at that cost per unit perspective from the condo resale side and also from the multifamily investment side. That can give you a quick insight on whether or not there's a good opportunity there for a deal as a buy and hold. If I was looking at, again, Providence is really my market, or general Providence. If I was looking at a 3-unit in downtown Providence and it's on the market for $650,000 or $600,000 as a 3-unit, that's $200,000 per unit. I know a lot of multifamilies in Providence can tend to trade for $250,000 to $275,000 if it's a nice building. So automatically I know there's some potential value in there depending on, again, the next phase. What's the square footage? What's the bedroom bathroom count? 1-bedroom units would obviously trade for less than 2 or 3s. So some of those quick metrics you can use just so you can start to weed through the noise on what deals even make sense looking at further. To recap, my 3, number 1, the 1% rule. Do the monthly projected rents at least cover 1% of the proposed purchase price? If so, does the square footage and bedroom bathroom count make sense, or are there other opportunities there to add more bedrooms or add more bathrooms? And then if that's the case, are there more income opportunities in the property? Can you rent out additional storage space in, let's say, the basement or the garage or on the property? Are there external structures in the property that you can use to make some more money? Third metric I would use is cost per unit. How much are you paying for each unit in the property by buying it as one? Less than the typical in the market? If so, maybe there's some opportunity there to create some equity. Or if you're like me and you're considering potential condo development opportunities, condo conversion opportunities, what would that equivalent unit sell for as a condo? Are you getting it for less because you're buying it as a multifamily and there's extra equity built in if you sell it off individually? In that similar fashion as well, one other metric you can use depending on your objective, or at least that I look at, is lot size. Obviously, if you buy a property with a large lot, if it's big enough, you can potentially subdivide the lot. either sell off a lot for someone to build on or build on it yourself. So similar to the square footage of the property, I look at the square footage of the lot. If I was looking at, let's say, a 3-family in East Providence, and the lot size was 40,000 square feet, pretty good chance you might be able to work something out with an extra lot. Obviously, you don't have to look at the zoning and where the property sits on the lot and all that good stuff, but something to consider as potential opportunity down the line. As always, if you have questions on topics like this, or you want to start your real estate investing journey, shoot me a DM and I'd be more than happy to help. I'll see you in the next one.